people in. Just want to thank everybody for joining us here for today, our Puerto Rico pre-learning webinar entitled A Movement Journey. The journey really is from many of us from the Andrus Family Fund and Communities for Just Schools Fund grantee family, heading down to San Juan, Puerto Rico, journeying to be with our brothers and sisters on the island. You may have already taken that journey this year. Maybe you went before Hurricane Maria or after. The point is that we're all going as a community, and if you've ever traveled with family, you know that that tends to require a little bit of preparation, including daydreaming about what do we want this trip to be like? What are some things we want to come from this journey and this encounter? So I just want to welcome all of you and introduce you to our executive director at the Andrus Family Fund, Leticia Peguero, to give you some introductory remarks before we get started. Leticia, take it away.
Thank you, Manuela. I don't have that much to say. So for those that don't know me, my name is Leticia, and I have the pleasure and the honor of serving with this amazing team here at the Andrus Family Fund and our colleagues at the Communities for Just Schools. I have the pleasure to serve as the executive director. And, you know, recently we were told by our partners that we are supportive and nimble and bold funders, and I hope, and that we are dedicated to equity. And so I know that Manuela is very proud of that, and so am I. And I hope that both our trip to Puerto Rico and the work that we're doing here to get us ready embodies that. The only other thing I'll say before I pass it back to Manuela is, I would love to have you all join me in thinking about a question that has been leading our work here and has been leading the team as we sometimes are faced with unequitable practices here in this industry that we call philanthropy. And we oftentimes ask ourselves at AFF, how do our actions lead to more equity? How do our actions lead to a more just world? And those are really hard questions to answer, but they lead our work. They lead our collaboration here in New York and with our colleagues and our brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico. So I encourage you to ask each other and yourselves that question: how do my actions lead to more equity? And how do our actions, whether they be whatever your perch, lead to more racial justice? Join me in that quest. Join us in that struggle. Because I think it leads us to outcomes that sometimes are a little bit more just. So I welcome you all to this conversation. For those that I don't know, I'm excited to know you. And for those that are in Puerto Rico, I'm excited to be in your company and in your community and in our community in just a few weeks. Manuel, I'm gonna hand it back to you and mute myself.
Fantastic. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Bienvenidos de nuevo. We are imagine we're having a virtual lunch together where we're just sitting and breaking bread and learning a little bit about each other's work and daydreaming together about what we want our journey to create for our own organizations, for our members, for our staff, for the movement, for education justice and youth justice, and for our brothers and sisters on the island in Puerto Rico. And so I just want you to reflect a little bit about that. Try to stay dynamic and engaged by chatting in any affirmation or questions that you may have in the chat. In my community or in my family, we'll say "ache" when we hear something that we particularly agree with, or "right on." Feel free to just chat in your words of affirmation, your questions and your doubts as we move through the webinar. It is a 2-hour webinar. We're not sure we're going to take up all the time, but we will be showing some video throughout the course of the webinar. And so for those of you on the phone, I invite you to use all of your senses, especially your listening, to get a sense of what we're showing via video that you won't be able to see, but we'll share the links after. Before we start, I just want to give you a quick overview of our upcoming conference, Education Anew, Shifting Justice, which we are proudly organizing with the Communities for Just Schools Fund, and our colleagues are on the phone and will be able to introduce themselves shortly. We have been really excited to partner with a lot of amazing groups in Puerto Rico to advise a little bit about the conference program, to welcome us into their home spaces at 11 different sites for our community tours, to with our allies and partners and leaders from our grantee family, who are the advisory committee members, more than 15 different people across various organizations, providing insights on what is the learning that they want to share and impart with each other and the type of relationships they want to build on the island. So I will pass it on to Jen to show a quick summary video of our upcoming conference. We got note that you all can't hear the sound. Give us 1 second to make the modifications.
To Manny and Jen, we've done this before. When you click the share screen, there's a button you have to click to share audio.
And I think that justice needs to be talked about.
Yo te diría que la justicia para mi pueblo es que nos reconozcamos como pueblo.
Justice is about a little girl not having to be afraid.
El derecho a una vida digna, ¿verdad? El derecho a no ser abusado.
We landed in Puerto Rico for a few reasons, one of which was the devastation of Hurricane Maria.
It's time to rewrite the broken narrative about who young people of color are and who their communities are.
And when we think about justice writ large, what do we mean when the current political climate does not recognize and actually negates the lived experience and the histories of a good portion of the United States?
I actually think that kind of the purpose of something like Education Anew, Shifting Justice is even that much more important. It's a chance to kind of step away from the incredible work folks are doing every day in their communities and at the state level, and being able to share it with other people and to learn to contextualize how does my work fit into the work that this other really amazing youth organizing group is doing in this place. So many of the people who will be coming to join us at this conference have put everything on the line for their movements, for the movement.
Bringing Education Anew to Puerto Rico at this time has been about a lot of things, but to us, it's been about how do we enter a community with the understanding that we know nothing and we're here to learn everything, and that we can bring resources, knowledge of different parts of the United States, and then we can create fertile ground for real collaborative work.
Y yo creo que esa conferencia va a ser muy, muy importante porque va a poner a la luz pública la situación que vivimos muchas personas aquí.
Thank you, everyone. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you for your patience as we figure out our tech. Okay, hopefully that is better. So basically, what I wanted to do was turn it over to Jamie and Dina and Communities for Just Schools Fund to talk a little bit about the learning that we've been doing prior to getting to Puerto Rico, and the learning exchange that took place a few weeks back.
All
So
right.
Jamie, are you able to unmute?
Can you all hear me?
Dina's got this.
We can tag team.
Okay.
All right.
So,
So,
signs,
good afternoon,
Jamie.
everyone. I'm Tina
Or
Robinson
Dina.
with Communities for Just Schools
Okay,
Fund.
I think you're on mute, Dina.
Oh, no. Hello? Better? Yay. Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Dina Robinson Mock with Communities for Just Schools Fund. I recognize some faces out there in the Hollywood squares that I see. Really honored to be here with you today and to just talk a little bit about the learning exchange that Communities for Just Schools Fund hosted in August. So August 11th and 12th, we convened a learning exchange in New Orleans that we called Solidarity Summer PR. And it was really an opportunity for us to bring together Communities for Just Schools Fund grantee partners across the network with some fabulous guests and friends from Puerto Rico to basically engage in a 2-day session of learning, building, just exploring and understanding the social, economic, and political realities of Puerto Rico, both pre and post Maria. I think, not to go too hard on this, but I think it was incredible. And we have some of the folks who were at that learning exchange on this call, which I'll invite you to pipe in if you want to share a little bit about your experience there. What we did was we covered a couple of different topics. One of those was the privatization of public education in Puerto Rico. And one of the reasons that we decided to host the learning exchange in New Orleans was because we saw some synergies, right? Certainly not to compare disasters. We know that every situation is unique. And at the same time, we found some similar patterns, some similar trends of what happens when a disaster happens, right? What happens to the education system? We were joined by Mercedes Martinez, who I know we'll hear from today, from president of the Federation of Teachers in Puerto Rico, who really shared and unpacked with us what the fight has been to save schools. And she did an incredible presentation for us where we were really able to dive in of what privatization looks like, what that fight is, what the organizing and resistance has been to try to stop it. And I know we'll hear more about that today. We also had the opportunity to learn about the community of Piñones and Luisa and African heritage. We had an opportunity to hear about the cultural legacy of resistance and culture and arts of Bomba, and had an opportunity to really experience that with music and dance and connection. And we had an opportunity to really dive into aligned movements for justice. So what has been Black and Puerto Rican solidarity throughout the years, learning about everything from community control and the struggle for Black education in the Ocean Hill, Brownsville community in Brooklyn, the history of the Young Lords, what migration has looked like for all of these communities. The image that you see on your screen there is one of our group shots from folks at the Learning Exchange, hosted at Dillard University in New Orleans. And it was just powerful. And so I think that our intention really was to provide a political education opportunity for folks to really dive in preparation for this conference, but also beyond. I'll pause for a second because I know we have some folks who were at that learning exchange. I just want to open some space if you want to say anything about what your experience was there. And not to put you on the spot, but just wanted to give you some room. Any thoughts? I see Channing and Barbara there. I see Estianola from Youth on Board. Yeah, I'm calling you out. And you know what? You can also share your thoughts in the chat box too, so no pressure.
This is Estianola from Youth on Board. I accept the call out, Dina.
Thank you.
Sorry, I missed some of your report back, but I'll just, if I echo what some of what you said. But for me, what stood out to me is the emphasis on art and dance, and how that is such a huge part of how our people bounce back from disasters that happen in our lives, that we don't ever forget that despite the terrible things and the aftermath of such terrible things, that life is still worth living. And so one of the things that I'm still taking away from that gathering is just the spirit behind all the drumming and the dancing, and these were heavy topics, but yet I felt like I left rejuvenated and lighter because we made sure to still celebrate us and how far we've come and how much more we still have to do and will do in the name of justice.
Awesome. Thank you, Esty. Yeah, so powerful experience. We also have some resources and materials that we were able to circulate to our partners from that gathering, and what we really hope is to continue that learning when we show up next month in Puerto Rico. So thank you all on the call who joined us, and we're really excited to be a part of this.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dina, for sharing a little bit about that wonderful learning exchange, where for some folks, it was the very first time they understood that Puerto Ricans also identify, many of them as African descent, to make those connections between Maroon culture and resistance on the island historically and what is happening in local communities. So we're super excited to go ahead and do what Dina said, continue the learning. And so without further ado, I just want to bring us all back together to the purpose of today's call, which is partly to continue learning. We have some amazing speakers on the line who are going to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their work, and then also help orient us to some of the history, the political and social movements that have been happening in Puerto Rico to date, as well as some of the ways that they conceive of the concept, they conceive of solidarity. What are some ways that we can begin to plant the seeds to be in further solidarity with Puerto Rico? And what does that have to do with the work ahead of all of us who are attending the convening, which is this work around education justice and juvenile justice and really social justice writ large? We know that I separate these issues, but they're all interconnected. It's all the young people we care about, the communities they're embedded in, their families, their social, political, historical, spiritual, emotional wellness and well-being that we're fighting for. And so I would like to actually start us off with Mercedes Martinez, who is the president of the Teachers Federation from Puerto Rico. She's an ESL teacher and she's been active in the union since 2006. Mercedes participated with thousands of teachers in the 10-day strike and has really been bringing the fight of education justice in Puerto Rico to the forefront. So Mercedes, I know that you are not on video, but we do have your PowerPoint. Wanted to see if you could chat with everybody and tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing so far. So I think to unmute yourself, let me see if we can do it on your behalf. Are you able to unmute 787? One second, everybody. Good. Okay, that's you.
Okay, that's me?
Yes, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me in this important conversation. Hi to everyone that's on the line on this call. Sorry not to be on video, I couldn't make it, but I'm happy to be here. We're very excited about all of you coming down here to Puerto Rico next month for the learning exchange. I know it will be wonderful, and solidarity bonds will be extended nationwide and internationally as well. As for myself, I am an ESL teacher from Puerto Rico. I have been the president of the Teachers Federation for the past 3 years now, going for 3 more now, and being a member of the union since I joined to the teaching profession about 14 years ago. I think it's very important for everybody to understand that the fight in defense of public education in Puerto Rico is not a new fight. It has been accelerated now because of the fiscal board that we have in Puerto Rico and because of the disaster capitalism that has been on steroids after Hurricane Maria last year. But it's a long existing fight that has been given for more than 25 years. And in 2008, the Teachers Federation was the exclusive representative of all 45,000 teachers in our island. The Secretary of Education and the governor on that time wanted to start implementing charter schools in our country. They wanted to eliminate liberal art courses, music courses, classes that will be teaching our kids and our youth in a holistic manner. They will be deprived of. Teachers will be laid off. They did not want to increase the teacher salary. And in comparison to any of the U.S. jurisdictions, teachers in Puerto Rico are the worst paid, starting at $21,000 per year in our country with bachelor's or master's degree. A lot of teachers with doctorate degree in our country. So we were fighting for salary justice, for education justice, against privatization. The government did not want to give in. So we went to a General Assembly of more than 8,000 members that decided to go on strike. So we did for 10 days, and that got us a 14% salary increase. But the most important victory that we obtained through the struggle was a signed stipulation in Puerto Rico stating that no charter schools will be implemented. And for the past 25 years, we have been able to stop charter schools. So those are the first slides I think that you have in the PowerPoint. And as years went by, 2014 comes in, and we have the Popular Democratic Party in charge of our country, and 100 schools were announced to be shut down by that administration. 2015, 100 other schools were announced to be shut down. And with the organization of the community, with the parents, the youth, our students, our teachers, we were able to prevent about 65 school closures from taking effect. So the remaining 120 were shut down. An elevator amount is a very high amount, even though we were able to save so many. But the government is very strict. They announce the school closures when the semester is over. That way, it gives you a little amount of time to organize the community to fight back. 2016, an oversight fiscal board comes to our island and is appointed by U.S. Congress and by President Barack Obama, who signed the law Promesa. And that fiscal board has 7 non-elected officials governing our country. They are the ones that are approving the budget, the laws, and they want the Puerto Rican people to pay for a $2 billion odious debt that was not created by the working class, that was not created by our students. But the working class, our students, our mothers, our retirees are the ones that are being sacrificed in order to pay for what's unpayable after more than 120 years of colonialism in our country. So the fiscal board is an imperial board, dictated and approved within the fiscal plan that $14 million should be saved by closing more schools. That $566 million needed to be cut from the budget of the Department of Education. And that was going to happen by laying off teachers, laying off other employees from the Department of Education, shutting down schools, cutting $70 million from the budget of the special education program for our kids with special necessities and special needs. So it's all an attack on the poorest children and on the poorest working class of our country. Julia Kelleher in 2017 became the appointed Secretary of Education by the pro-statehood party. There are two major parties in Puerto Rico, the pro-statehood and the pro-commonwealth. They both act like if they were Democrats and Republicans similarly. And pro-statehood continued the campaign of shutting down schools. Immediately after she came into power, she announced that she would shut down 305 schools. We were able to save about 140, but she still was able to shut down 166, plus the 120 that were already shut down. So we're talking about a lot of schools that have been shut down in the country. And to make matters worse, the hurricane occurred September 20th last year, Category 5, devastated the country. 300,000 homes were lost. More than 70,000 people remain with blue tarps on the roofs in our country. Electricity was lost. Thousands of lives were lost because of the negligence of the federal government and the state government of Puerto Rico, plus the fiscal board. So taking advantage of the people that were so vulnerable, they decided immediately after the hurricane, like 1 week, 2 weeks after, that it was time to shut down some more schools. And the Secretary of Education, Julia Kelleher, announced 184 schools should be shut down because it was time to do a true reform, such as they did in New Orleans after Katrina. That's what she said. And that way she would be able to make billions of dollars from FEMA that she would not be receiving otherwise. So she was taking advantage of the suffering of the people of Puerto Rico. Little did she know that as hurt as we were, Puerto Rican mothers and grandmothers, and children and teachers were so angry at this that protest became a daily thing, and she had to revoke all the school closures of all 25 schools from San Juan that she wanted to shut down immediately after then. They remained open, and her plan to shut down the 184 schools were stopped by the resilience and the struggle of the people of Puerto Rico, the communities, and the Teachers Federation. All this was taking effect while the Teachers Federation was at the same time doing brigade work of fixing schools, of fixing our teachers' homes, our students' homes, while providing meals to our poorest communities, while doing a partnership between schools, Puerto Rico, and the state so they could collect materials for our children to go back to school. And it was very sad because every psychologist and every study says that after such a disaster, children need to go back to some type of normalcy. And that happens in school. And it's not only tragic that they lost their homes, their friends, family members, but you want to shut down their second home. You want to take away their teachers. You want to fire their teachers. And it's trauma after trauma. So we were able to stop that then, and we are happy that we could. 21 of us got arrested of the executive board while protesting in civil disobedience, asking her to reopen the schools when she denied to do so after the hurricane, even though they were ready. We took the Department of Education to court searching for education justice for our children, and we were able to force the department to reopen those schools after the hurricane. And where are we now? This semester comes, we did a one-day strike in March because decisive capitalism works fast. They wanted to fasten their privatization agenda, so they approved the privatization of Puerto Rico Electrical Authority. Then they approved in law, which is Law 85 now, the privatization of 10% of our schools, and they wanted to implement that immediately now in August. We were able to stop that this year. They have only started or begun one charter school with 58 students, but we know that next year, that 10% that they just approved is going to take effect if we don't fight back and we don't stop them. So what we are doing right now is going community after community and organizing parents, organizing youth, organizing teachers to fight back. Soon at this term, we need to expose this nationally and internationally. We need school closures to be revoked. It has been a total of 562 schools shut down 5 years. Compared to any U.S. jurisdiction, is the most amount of schools shut down permanently by the government. So it's unacceptable. We are fighting to revoke school closures because overcrowded classrooms are the norm now. More than 35 students per classroom. Working conditions, which are the students' learning conditions, are very bad right now because of this. So we are organizing everyone to understand what's at stake. Is the life of public education in our country that's at stake. Is the right of our children that they deserve to have a quality, public, free, appropriate education that's at stake, to give in our schools to privatizers, to nonprofit and for-profit corporations, to private entities that see a money sign, a dollar sign in our children and in our schools. So we are sure that we need to do an indefinite strike. We need to make alliances with other working class sectors, but that takes time. So we are working on that right now, giving talks at lunch hour, after 3, in schools, in the districts, so we can get ready next semester for all teachers to fight back from the streets the amount of time that we need to in order to gain education justice for our children and to have the desirable working conditions that our teachers deserve, and to save public education from those hedge funds, from those bondholders that want to take advantage of what belongs to us and belongs to the children of Puerto Rico. So I think that summarizes.
Thank you so much, Mercedes, for sharing what's been happening with the teachers and the schools and the privatization of schools in Puerto Rico. We will come back to you with some additional questions. I just want to remind everybody to go ahead and chat your questions in to Mercedes and to everyone. We want to turn quickly to Dennis Flores, who is a New Yorican multimedia artist, activist, and educator, born and raised in Sunset Park. He's the co-founder of the Sunset Park, which is a grassroots community organization that advocates around issues of discriminatory policing and housing rights. Dennis is a documentary filmmaker who earlier this year won an Emmy for a short film that he produced on police brutality in New York City. And Dennis has been leading a lot of the solidarity efforts between barrio to barrio, neighborhood to neighborhood, community to community, between Sunset Park and Puerto Rico. One of the things Dennis has also been doing is actually starting to support young people in Puerto Rico in building their knowledge and leadership and skill set to engage in their own cop watch activities on the island. And so I want to turn to Dennis really quickly. Jen will be putting in the chat box some of the videos we'll be looking at that Dennis has produced. I just want you all to know that if we're playing the video and you're experiencing some difficulty in the streaming, instead what you can do is copy that YouTube link on the chat box, and while we play it, watch it directly on your computer, and then tune back into us. So that's the best we could do to ensure that you could actually see it in its integrity. So Dennis, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. And you're on mute, Dennis.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Manuela. Appreciate the opportunity to share with you guys some of my experiences. You guys able to hear me?
Yeah, if you could speak maybe a little bit louder, that'd be great.
So, yeah, I'm grateful for the opportunity just to share some of, our experiences, what we've been involved in the last a couple of months. So I am co-founder of a nonprofit organization in Brooklyn called El Grito de Sunset Park. A group of us that started basically organizing community members to document police encounters in our community. And through that, throughout the years, we documented a lot of issues that happened within the Puerto Rican community in Brooklyn. And after the Puerto Rican Day Parade, there was a history of a lot of violence that occurred. And this tactic was used putting pressure on the police department so we can organize a parade in Sunset Park on the evening of the Puerto Rican Day Parade. And what that has resulted is us being able to... Hard to hear. It's really...
Sorry, everyone. Let's make sure you're on mute. Thank you. Go ahead, Dennis.
So it allowed us to, in Sunset Park with the Puerto Rican community, be able to use citizen video to not just highlight, incidents of violence by the police, but also use these videos as evidence to push campaigns to help people who were wrongly, charged with crimes. We created a database in Brooklyn with the help of this organization called Witness, where we have a platform where there's profiles of police officers with badge numbers, their identity, a history of discipline, a history of incidents, of profiles. And what we're working on now is to be able to replicate this in Puerto Rico. We're partnering with an organization called Kilómetro Cero. Back right after the hurricane hit in Sunset Park, we were able to organize this relief effort where we shipped out and then went in person and distributed close to 2 million pounds of relief aid. And what we weren't expecting or planning, or not trying to be naive, but was that there was a lot of issues with police in Puerto Rico on trying to prevent us from even distributing some of the aid that we collected. In Aguadilla, back in early October, we were at this caserío, Jose Aponte, where we were approached by police officers that have a cuartel right across the street from this caserío. And police officers, there was a line of residents, over 1,000 people there, as we were giving each one a same portion of food and medicine. And we were approached by the police, and they were like, look, we have families too, we suffered, and can you share with us some of this relief? And we were like, I thought about it, I was like, of course, it's the right thing to do despite whatever, issues we believe occurred. We provided the same portion that we were giving to family members from this caserío. And the police officers responded to us, were like, nah, I'm a cop, like, we deserve more. You need to, I'm here to protect those people. And I said to them, look, this is, these are human beings just like you, and we're all gonna, get the same equal amount. And we can't give you more because you're a cop. And the cop just turned around and said, oh, va a ser así. And it was like, is that how it's gonna be? And the police officer left, came back like half an hour later with about 20 police officers. And, we had access to the storefront, where the back of the door of the storefront, the police broke the door and formed a human chain of police officers and started robbing us. So they took all the tools and batteries and flashlights, water, medicine, and there's so many people there watching the whole thing. And I got a gun pointed at me by the police officer. It says, si no te gusta, llámate el FBI. If you do not like this, then call the FBI. And we had recorded this. We had documented this, and since then, something that wasn't planned by us was having to cop watch while we're distributing aid throughout the island. And to say that, this continued to occur whatever part of the island we were at, whether it was the police or, the office of certain mayors that approached us in similar fashion, where they wanted us to, set stuff aside just for them. And they created a blockade. They stopped us. They prevented us many times. And, for us, it was more important that, we bring this aid to caseríos, to the tops of certain, region mountains that the aid wasn't getting to. And, these were the things that kept reoccurring. So,
Dennis, can you explain to everybody what is a caserío?
So caseríos are public housing developments where, what many folks live through is that they're the last to get any sort of support, any aid. And we saw that when we went from public housing development to public housing development, where the administration that worked at these public housing developments, they were gone. They were gone when Hurricane Irma hit. And we saw the same thing where the first floors were flooded, where there was no food, no water, and they're out there collecting water from certain creeks that were, infested, and the lack of response, or what we witnessed, let's say in Aguadilla, was that serious divide where the administration was preventing community folks from bringing aid, where if it wasn't controlled by them, where if they didn't get their cut, then, they would make it impossible for us. So
I wonder, Dennis, if you think it would be a good time now to show the Power Malu video so people get a sense of the faces and the people that were really running this community to community solidarity.
Sounds good, please.
Is that okay? So I'm gonna put it in the chat box, everybody. Again, as we're streaming it, it might prove a little hard for you to see, so feel free to copy it from the chat box.
Check it, they have. After Maria and everything, I had to do something for the kids, and that's what I'm here. That's why I say I got to work with this community, because this new generation coming up, they don't really understand what we went through. And we did a lot of work in here. Not only giving food, but we did a lot of social work. We had to visit a lot of people, elderly people, check it, they had medicine, food, water. At the end of the day, it was drained, but at the end of the day, I was feeling good to myself because we was helping people. I did a lot of work, but what I did the most was trying to use my name and my personality so we could go and connect other people. I got other people over here that really did help, like, Giovanni Maisone. Giovanni was a great help. I think if Giovanni wouldn't stay right next to me through all that Maria situation, I would have probably left. We Puerto Ricans and Latinos, we are one big family. We united, Even sometimes in the daily basis, we don't like each other, but when it comes to the struggle, we always grab our hands together and we fight. And that's the beauty of everything, Because nobody in life can do it by themselves. We always need support from somebody else to lift you up. I didn't do it by myself. I didn't. I was just a poor kid from the hood with no opportunities. My mom was a drug addict. My mom never was there for me in no basketball games. I didn't have no support from my family, and that's what breaks my heart. But somebody came in here and saw me and said, here, let me grab you, let me take you, let me help you out. But not everybody got that blessing. I had it, God gave it to me. So now it's just, I gotta give it back to somebody. And somebody that really needs it, and I'm there. I'm there for them, and I'm not gonna stop. My dream is to have hundreds of kids here every day. Even if I'm here 8 hours a day, and I gotta take care of hundreds of kids, that's what I wanna do. Even if your kid don't become a professional.
So in the interest, sorry y'all, another 2-minute piece, and we encourage you all to take time to watch these on your own. The next, yeah, that one. Thank you, y'all, and I apologize.
Up the rain dry like sugar cane, way before the hurricane. Irma came, Maria came, we were shamed when FEMA came. No help, they all false advertise, put all this red tape and patronize, while the government waits and stands aside. The authorities say that their hands are tied.
Compras done. Now we're gonna check on the buckets for the filters, and we out there in the mountains serving the people.
They suck the rain dry.
So Dennis, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what El Grito de Sunset Park learned about solidarity. I know that this is like the immediate relief and post-hurricane time. And what did you all learn about engaging in these solidarity efforts? And what do you think is to come as we think about some work long-term around communities just like the folks on this call right now who are going to Puerto Rico and maybe thinking about how to enter and how to build long-term solidarity? Just if you could share some of those lessons learned.
I guess for us, it was more about...
And you're on mute, by the way, sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead, you're good, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So for us, it was clear that, we're from New York. We're not from Puerto Rico. And, as much as, we want to bring support over there, if we're not directly working with people who are on the ground that are from these certain communities, like the first video we played there, which was Antonio Puruco Latimel, and he's from a public housing development called Luis Llorens Torres. And he's a former professional basketball player that after his career continued to live at this public housing development that he was born and raised in. And he's a natural leader in his community that is, coaching basketball, organizing with a lot of the at-risk youth, creating events to prevent violence amongst gangs. He is someone that in that community for us was a key person for us to connect with and to build with and provide resources for him, as opposed to us going in there and trying to do the work, which is not our place. Our place was to really, we're in the diaspora. We have access to a lot of resources here that, it's more like playing our lane, playing our role in providing support. And really trying to listen to them and be as much as, as a support where we're taking direction from them. And it's not us setting the tone or setting what the work plan is going to look like. And that's what actually for us enabled us to work with different communities and be able to enter a lot of these public housing developments where we build relationships with people from there first. Where, you know, these are a lot of places that have the stigma where people don't want to go in there. They're afraid. They think that there's going to be violence and, you know, a lot of poor people and all of that nonsense. But clearly that's not what we saw. Clearly we saw people who felt that, you know, they lived through this abandonment where the administration failed them. And we just wanted to be a part of this community-led effort to be como like we hear from folks over there, solo el pueblo salvará el pueblo. You know, only the people will take care of its own. It's not, we can't, and what we lived through this was that, you know, we had to do it for ourselves. We couldn't just wait on anybody. So, you know, it was just that was really setting the tone where, you know, we enter into communities and build relationships with people that they have the knowledge. They're pretty well equipped. And all it needs is some type of support sometimes about, you know, providing certain tools that we have access to, that we need to, you know, pass it on and put it in their hands.
Right on. Thank you so much, Dennis. I want to shout out Jorge, who put in the chat box. There are many organizations who've been working in the front lines, organizing for years, who formed La Red de Apoyo Mutuo, and he shared with us the website. So feel free to check out La Red to learn a little more about other groups that have been needing the mutual support fight. And in this conversation around collaboration and mutual support, I think it's a perfect segue to bring in Xiomara's voice into our conversation. So Xiomara Caro Diaz is the Director of New Organizing Projects at the Center for Popular Democracy, and she's also heading up the Maria Fund, which was started immediately after Hurricane Maria, when communities saw we need a vehicle to provide resources immediately, and we want to make sure that the resources will go to somewhere, an organization or a partner that we can trust, who has strong relationships on the ground, that it's not going to be sitting in these like containers that we saw stalled on the docks while we saw the suffering and grief of local communities, and felt really unable to take action and suffered the trauma of not being able to reach our loved ones. I remember many of my friends and family just holding their breath, hoping to hear from loved ones who were disconnected from electricity and telephone and all these other things. Xiomara, as you share with us a little bit about your understanding of the work that you do, organizing resources and connecting organizations and communities to support each other, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind starting with a step back. Dennis just said, you know, this is the failure of the government to really step in and provide support for what many of us were thinking of were citizens of Puerto Rico. What is the story with the political status of Puerto Rico and its history of that status, and why do you think that informs, how do you think that informs the governmental response and also the nonprofit ecosystem, and what our solidarity could look like?
Thank you, Manuela. So yeah, my name is Xiomara Caro. As Manuela said, I am part of the advisory committee of the Maria Fund, which is one of the many funds that was created, but had a very specific focus on supporting organizing and supporting groups that do organizing and political work in Puerto Rico. The question about status, which is at the core, I think, of this conversation and many conversations, and using what Dennis said as a prompt, I think that part of it is that for many of us, it was clear that the government of the United States, you can't fail something that you've never had a commitment to, right? The narrative around failure is important, and it's also important to like lift up, like we've never been a priority or a place that is treated as, even our citizenship, right, was given really in exchange for something else, which was the lives of men and women to go to war for the United States. So, and from an anti-imperialistic perspective, understanding that really, I think what Hurricane Maria revealed was the permanent failure that of this political relationship, that it's always been there. And so sort of the metaphor that many people end up using about unveiling, right? Maria Hurricane Maria unveiled many things. It took away visually many things, physically, but I think it also opened up the eyes that the reason the federal government failed the people of Puerto Rico is because it is not a government that responds to people of Puerto Rico. The people of Puerto Rico were invaded, right, from my perspective. And so the political relationship is a relationship that is unequal from its creation, and it's supposed to be that way, right? And
Can you break that down, Xiomara, a little bit? Like some of us on the call don't know that. What is that relationship? When does it start, and what is the invasion and how did it happen?
Sure. So in 1898, as a part of the Spanish-American War, Puerto Rico Spain basically concedes Puerto Rico to the United States government as a prize of war. And that's the moment we recognize as the invasion. Before that, Puerto Rico had been a colony of Spain from 1492. And so since 1898, Puerto Rico has been some people labeled it a territory, but really a colony of the United States. And up to 1952, as a matter of fact, the person who, the highest general or representation of U.S. government in Puerto Rico was a military general, several of them, who would be appointed by the President of the United States, right? So in 1952, a governmental local structure was really created as a concession to a very strong, I want to say a concession, more like a way of appeasing, right? A very strong left movement organizing that had a party that had thousands and thousands of people who supported the cause of liberation of Puerto Rico. And it was no longer sort of sustainable for the United States to maintain the political relation, the way it kept a colonial relationship with Puerto Rico. And so in 1952, there's a whole process that would be too much to get into right now. But basically, there's a whole process of creating a fake government. I mean, for some people, it is still, right, it's an administrative structure, public structure, but it really, even the Constitution that was approved in a constitutional assembly was revised by the Congress of the United States. It was amended and it was approved with the amendments, right? And so that 1952 starts a period of a local infrastructure government called the Commonwealth, and in Spanish called the Estado Libre Asociado, which is interesting because it's state, a free associated state, which anyone who's hearing is like, what is that? Well, we don't, I think part of in the last couple of years, we've realized it's not really a thing, right? It is a thing. It's a way to administer a geographic place and the people, right? And the lives without really an equitable or even like just sovereign relationship, and without giving rights to participate. So the people in Puerto Rico, even though they're citizens and were made citizens, as I said earlier, don't vote for the President of the United States, don't have representation in Congress. And there are laws that maybe people heard after Hurricane Maria, like the Jones Act, that regulate the use of the sea and around Puerto Rico, and regulate ships and what can happen in that space in between Puerto Rico and the United States. And it regulates, as a matter of fact, all, can't find the translation right now, but all shipping and anything that is exported and incomes to Puerto Rico. And so I think it's true. What did I say? Like there was a deep failure, but that failure was not after Hurricane Maria only. That failure was because the infrastructure beforehand really didn't exist, or it does exist. It exists for extraction of wealth. It exists for pharmaceutical companies for more than 30 years to make money and not pay taxes. It now exists for millionaires to have their businesses in Puerto Rico and not pay taxes on their wealth. So it exists for the reasons why many of our communities are colonized, which is extraction, which is using us for whatever benefits, and it isn't. And so similar to many people who are watching in your own community, that feeling of being used, that of being pushed aside when you are no longer needed, when your land and the place you live and you call home becomes profitable. There's no conversation. There's just like gentrification. And so I think Hurricane Maria, as Mercedes said, really intensified that. Intensified and made it easier in many ways, because the level of suffering and attention that was going to relief really made it difficult for people to shift into a fight back moment where we're in survival. And in spite of that, I think it's like very, has to be like celebrated and feel very proud of the resistance of the people in Puerto Rico, that even in those moments, we knew from the beginning, like, we're not waiting around for anyone, right, for government. Nobody was. Like, people knew that we were gonna have to survive. And so I think what Jorge lifted up of the mutual support centers, which are one of the main networks of groups that really are born after Hurricane Maria, but come from really a history of 10, 15 years of organizing and a whole generational movement and a practice, a political practice, from the beginning knew that, right? And I think that we see that in the way that people have responded, and even the diaspora, right? That big movement to action is because we knew that relationship is false. It's a facade. We struggle with how can we change that, which is at the root of it. But in a moment of crisis, we knew we weren't waiting around for a U.S. government. At least, I mean, I can speak for myself. Other Puerto Ricans on this call can say so too. No one was waiting around for government to show up. And I think the last thing I'll add is like what Mercedes said about Promesa and having right now a fiscal control board, which is really like an imperial board of 6 white men and white women who make decisions of all the budget, and supposedly are there to solve a debt, which really has been created, right? Like that debt that Puerto Rico's right now before Maria, for people to have context, is in a debt that is over $100 billion. It's so knowing that that board is also a part of the reason why that's part of the failure, right? Because that board's really there to profit, to move the pieces of the game on the chessboard necessary to not really for the benefit of the people, but really to fix, quote unquote, right, the economic political system to then continue that process of profiting and exploitation.
That was really helpful, Xiomara, the historical overview and also kind of politically what's at stake on the island and how it's working. I want to take a minute to turn to Dennis's Cop Watch video. He documented El Paro Nacional, which was the people's resistance against Promesa, and I think it would really help add some color to what you're explaining to us right now. So he just put it in the chat. It says Cop Watch at El Paro Nacional. So we're going to turn to that.
Donde dice firmemente que la educación no será sectaria, que será pública y que será gratuita, que no se viole la Constitución que nos rige como país. Nosotros hemos creado, usted
La gente obviamente empieza.
Mírate cuando te den el retiro, a ver si vas a estar con esa misma cara. Cuando le cierren la escuela a tus hijas, a tus nietos, porque no puedan ni estudiar en la
So I just want to acknowledge some of the comments that we received in the chat from Maria and from Jorge, that it was definitely hard to revisit those images and the experience, and wanted to just acknowledge that Dennis produced this video, and it's part of a larger body of work that he's working on around what's been happening in Puerto Rico. Xiomara, I just wanted to give you a chance to maybe share your thoughts or reflections on what you saw. And then later on, wanted to invite Maria and Jorge, right after Jerry's presentation, if there's anything that you all would like to share about what the work is that you all are doing now in Puerto Rico, and any reflections you might have, that things that you would like people to know on this call as they come to the island to figure out how to meaningfully partner with you. But yes, Xiomara, any reflections on this, and in particular, like, what does this political climate mean for the nonprofit ecosystem or the movement ecosystem in Puerto Rico right now? What's that infrastructure like, and what do people need to know as they come to communities who are already resisting and organizing, and understanding what they're facing right now?
Thank you, Manuela. I'll leave comments about the video for another moment because it brings up a lot of stuff. I think that one thing that the video reminds me of, and where I want to like start off, is really something important for people to remember or to know, is that in Puerto Rico, like in many other places, probably in your own community, the struggle is really held by organizing that happens in our communities that is not necessarily paid, right? But I think particularly in Puerto Rico, that's important to lift up. Like the history of struggle is, one, definitely connected to the struggle for the liberation of Puerto Rico. And so when we talk about social justice, we talk about the left, we talk about advancing human rights, people's rights, we talk about education justice, it is increasingly connected to like you can't disconnect it from liberation, right? And in the context of Puerto Rico, that is a conversation about liberation politically, and it also has to do with building, right, in organizations that are liberated in the way they do the work. And so that said, when people come to Puerto Rico, something that I've learned to sort of lift up is one, organizing happens outside the nonprofit industrial complex more in Puerto Rico than in many other places, which I think is a great thing, right? Like we need institutions, we need we need infrastructures that support movement work. And in Puerto Rico, movement work has a strong history connected to many struggles, and it's usually not institutions, right? It's people go to your job and then at 6 p.m. you go into a meeting. And so through the Maria Fund in particular, we are, which is the fund that really has become like my full-time role to support, the intention has been, how do we support community organizations in Puerto Rico? And that can be nonprofits, but it also can be initiatives or a lot of political groups that have created nonprofits and are connecting, right, their political work to creating organizations that sort of become a backbone in community. How do we support them? One, recognizing that before Maria, many organizations were struggling. Like the reality is like the whole country was struggling. So organizations doing community work were also struggling to access funding. We're also struggling to just maintain their services. So that's something important to understand. Second, that not all organizations have a full infrastructure. So you might find an organization that has 2-3 staff that are doing the role of 6 people, right? And that's probably also a story many people on this call, right, it can experience back home. So there's a solidarity there and understanding how the work is held. And I think the other thing is a lot of emerging organizing. I think that one is like we have a strong history of resistance. We have a strong experience of resistance and of successful battles like Vieques and Adjuntas and El Gasoducto, which was a natural gas pipeline that was successfully stopped. Many battles, those being maybe the more cliche ones that people talk about. And there's a moment right now in which we're in where many activist groups are betting on creating new infrastructure, right? Those mutual support centers are part of that new infrastructure that are really betting on organizing. And I think that's where I think is the call to action in terms of solidarity. You're gonna come to Puerto Rico at a time where historically the nonprofit sector in Puerto Rico has been service-oriented. Many organizations that provide from a charity perspective don't necessarily think about organizing as a tool and don't necessarily think about it because many of them are funded by government in 80-90%. So when you think about the nonprofit industrial complex in Puerto Rico, it's many times an extension of the state. And what that means, and you can think about this in your own community, right? If you're running an organization that is suffering the consequences of privatization of education and your youth is suffering that, but 80% of your staff gets paid by the Department of Education, it's challenging, right, to shift into a model. So there's a mix of organizations who have always done political work. I lift up, Taller Salud was one of the organizations we partnered with to create the Maria Fund, always did political work and organizing, but many times held separate to the service work. Many times had to say, we do this in the office and then on the side we're battling these laws and proposals from government that are going to infringe the rights of women in Puerto Rico. And the Maria Fund has a strong commitment to betting on those organizations and their work, saying, yes, we should invest in organizing. Yes, we need to support organizations that really are thinking about changing the structural and deep reasons why we're in this, colonialism, capitalism, sexism, and patriarchy. Like, get in there, we'll support that, and that makes us different to many other funds. There is a new set of groups that are just starting, right? There are groups that are starting in terms of infrastructure, a long history of political work. And so they're figuring out, how do I run an organization while I maintain the political work? What's the balance? So I think the call to solidarity is really about thinking, one, relationships are at the backbone of everything we do. So the more you connect with people truly on how can you show solidarity, it's really about who you connect with and thinking about who you connect with during the community group visits, during the conference, like who are you having intentional conversation. The second is that solidarity is a long, like it's a little bit like a medium-term, long-term game, right? We can do things short-term, which will still be valuable, but really in the moment we're in, think about where do I have time and energy and resources as an organization to really throw down and just be real. Like we understand like you're also in similar fights. We don't expect people to, you know, like have to spend 20 hours a week like supporting something. So find that like sort of where is that niche? Where is that thing that you say, we do this really, really well. We would love to find a group in Puerto Rico that we can share this with. And the other part is learning. Like people in Puerto Rico have been struggling for the same time that people all over the world have been very successful in many things. And we've done it many times without formal resources, right? Like people put money out of their pockets, use their homes, use my printer at my office. We've figured out a way to fight back without a grant. And that's something that I think is an invitation to also listening, thinking about what do you want to learn about Puerto Rico? Like, where is it that thing that you think there can be an exchange? Because I do think like solidarity is very much about exchange, right? And like mutual support, which is right part of the philosophy of many of the groups. So I think that would be my call to action, like coming with, you know, bring your full self. Feel free to ask questions and write to those of us who are here and be curious and really like, you know, be open to falling, like really, I feel like a lot of people connect. You'll be able to connect your struggle to groups in Puerto Rico and think about what is one small way in which you can lead by setting something up. And it might just be something in a couple months, any way that you can make that solidarity into action.
And I really appreciated when we were planning for this call, Xiomara, that you shared that metaphor of, you know, solidarity. It's not a hookup, right? I met you at the club and, you know, and it was nice. And who knows what happened that night. And then I don't see you again. We're talking long-term solidarity, exploring the beginnings of relationship building for long-term relationship, y'all. So don't get allergic if that's not your style. But, you know, really think about that. What does that mean that communities have been constantly doing that? And you all know what that means. You've been doing it as well in your own respective communities.
And last say, Manuela, like, because, you know, the struggle, like the things that we're fighting against are connected at the top. And I think that's something to remember, right? Like the 1%.
Absolutely.
And they think about how do they strategize to move charterization, not just in Puerto Rico. They're thinking about it globally. They're thinking about our communities. So there's a why that we're connected. And I think like remembering that the 1% is meeting in places and figuring stuff out, right? Mm-hmm. They're not deciding like, oh, we're going to do this in Puerto Rico, we're not going to do it somewhere else. So this is like, we want to be in solidarity with all of you too. Like, we want to know about your struggles and ways in which we can be connected to that, right?
And I think actually that's right on point and that's a beautiful segue for Jerry. Jerry Maldonado is with us. He's a senior program officer for the Just Cities and Regions program at the Ford Foundation. So we're hearing the funder's perspective, and one of the benefits of hearing from Jerry actually and his deep relationships with various communities is that he is traveling internationally. So these international connections that Xiomara's pointing out, we're really excited to hear from Jerry to explore what's at stake right now for all of our communities and for social justice when we think about building long-term relationships and solidarity with Puerto Rico. So Jerry, I don't know if you're on the line. I know that he's about to get on a plane any minute. So I just wanted to thank him for making time to be with us. And hopefully has not yet boarded. Are you there, Jerry?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you so much for being with us.
Fantastic. Talk about philanthropy in action. I'm sitting on the floor in the waiting room and really happy to join this conversation here this afternoon. Mercedes, Dennis, and Xiomara, thank you guys. As Manuela said, I'm a senior program officer at Ford, and part of my work at the foundation over the last 10 years actually has been deeply connected to what happened in New Orleans. I've been working on the post-Hurricane Katrina kind of response and rebuilding efforts in New Orleans. And so for me, Hurricane Maria, like Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, was really as much a man-made disaster as it was a natural disaster. really rooted in a deep history of structural racism that's fueled inequality and really multiple generations of displacement. And so what I'm hoping to talk about a little bit this afternoon is a little bit about kind of how we got there and what's at stake. And it really builds on nicely many of the points that we've just heard from a bunch of the speakers. So Manuela, there's a short film, about 3 minutes, I wanted to show, if you have that available. The film kind of lays out some of the challenges to date, 1 year later after the storm, and how the federal response really has failed the island. Can you show that clip?
Sure, we'll put it on right now. Thanks, Jerry.
A year later, and still exposed to the elements. The skyline of Barceloneta, Puerto Rico is dotted with blue. Plastic tarps covering ripped-off roofs. 12 months after Hurricane Maria devastated the island, residents say help has been slow in coming or inexistent.
People from FEMA came and said, "How are you still living here?" because the water was so high. But later I got a letter saying I didn't lose anything in the hurricane, when I'd lost almost everything.
Of the over 1 million people in Puerto Rico that requested help from the U.S. Emergency Relief Agency, FEMA, over 50% of them were denied. For those that have started rebuilding, aid has been far from enough. The median grant to repair homes has been just $1,800.
I think we're all experiencing the same thing. We've been able to start rebuilding, but we haven't been able to finish because the money isn't enough.
While Donald Trump has congratulated his government on a job well done in Puerto Rico, residents of the U.S. territory tell an entirely different story, one of abandonment, death, and a lack of medical facilities and basic supplies.
When they took it, when they closed our medical clinic, why didn't they put another one in its place? It's been closed for a year, and they've done nothing.
While FEMA has spent more than $3 billion on aid to the island, its efforts have also been plagued by controversy and criticism, with, for example, millions of water bottles remaining undistributed. Independent studies have found that nearly 3,000 people died following Hurricane Maria, due in part to a lack of basic necessities, such as clean water and health care.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So I think where I want to really start with that kind of sobering view on what's happened a year later is really to reflect on what Xiomara said, that really the origins of the current crisis is really rooted in deeper political and economic roots. And it's really fundamentally a crisis of democracy. And I think, what we're seeing on the island really is a reflection of broader kind of transnational power dynamics. So, the same forces that drive criminalization and privatization and that are challenging kind of voting rights in the U.S., those are fundamentally the same forces at play in Puerto Rico. So I think to Xiomara's point, it's really important as we're thinking about solidarity to think about how we develop a joint understanding of what's driving inequality, what's driving these power imbalances in the U.S., in Puerto Rico, and how we take a more systemic approach at really tackling some of those big forces, right? Because the fights are manifested around different policy areas, but at the end of the day, they're disproportionately affecting communities of color in Puerto Rico, on the mainland. And these fights are really kind of personal, right? The island's political crisis really, as Xiomara said, is rooted in an economic crisis and a history of an extractive economy, right? From the sugarcane plantations that exploited the wealth based on the backs of slave labor to Operation Bootstrap that basically created huge tax giveaways to multinational corporations. These have caused cycles of internal displacement. It's a personal story for me. My family's from Puerto Rico. My family grew up in the countryside, were displaced from the countryside to the cities. When they couldn't find work during Operation Bootstrap, migrated to the U.S. and then were segregated in public housing developments, right? And so what we saw was this migration to the U.S. perpetuate this cycle of inequality, right? Where Puerto Ricans were met with racism and discrimination, locked into low-wage jobs, segregated into low-income neighborhoods, deprived of equal education opportunities, and subject to generations of criminalization. And this has got a long-term impact, this multi-generational impact In 2010, Puerto Ricans represented about 10% of the U.S. Latino population. 27% of Puerto Ricans live in poverty. That's higher than the rate for the general U.S. and Latino population. And so this whole pattern of economic inequality in the island, it's really rooted in a development model that basically put profits before people. Again, I think it's important to reflect on that, not just in the Puerto Rican experience, but in our own experiences here in the U.S. In Puerto Rico, that development model that put profits in front of people really fueled the economic crisis that led to migration. That migration, further hollowed out the government's ability to spend, to collect local revenue. That resulted in a lack of investment in infrastructure, in people, that basically created the perfect storm, literally, when Maria hit. And so like New Orleans before the storm, Puerto Rico had already really been in a deep crisis. About 40% of the population lived below the poverty line. And that crisis was just accelerating in the early 2000s. As the economy of the island tanked, it began accumulating this massive debt that we heard Mercedes and Xiomara talk a little bit about. The island owes over $100 billion to creditors. That debt really began in this deep recession years before Maria. And it was fueled by these predatory lenders, what some call venture capitalists, hedge funds, that really seized on the island's economic, their structural and political crisis to pile on debt while making huge profits. All the while feeding this economic crisis that fed another political crisis, right? That basically pushed the island, on the verge of bankruptcy. That then created a justification for the creation of an emergency control board, which, as Xiomara said, really undermined local democracy and created an opportunity for implementing this widespread privatization agenda, right? The closure of schools, of health clinics, public services, less invested in infrastructure, energy. And so with this backdrop, Hurricane Maria hits, right? And Hurricane Maria causes about $140 billion in damages. Today, there's still about 45,000 homes that are still waiting for the government aid to fix their roofs. About 8,000 small businesses, almost 10% of the island's total small businesses are closed. As Mercedes said, hundreds of schools are being closed as part of a significant privatization agenda. On top of that, the federal government has responded incredibly inequitably. They've rejected 60% of the FEMA applications for aid, and those folks that got money got only about a quarter of the dollars that other hurricane survivors from Hurricane Harvey got. This has all fueled a massive migration, right? Another wave of migration. And my parents were kind of in that earlier wave of migration during Operation Bootstrap, when the island was moving from kind of a rural economy to an industrial economy. The migration accelerated during this debt crisis and is now in hyper mode. About 200,000 islanders have left Puerto Rico since the storm. And it's projected that another 10% of the population is expected to leave in the next 5 years. This is massive, right? So to date now, the population of Puerto Ricans on the mainland are a little over 5 million, and there are about 3.5 million Puerto Ricans on the island. That means there are more Puerto Ricans living on the mainland than there are on the island. And so this raises huge challenges, right, in terms of displacement, in terms of privatization, in terms of democracy, that again have really significant local and transnational implications. And I think that I'll leave it to say that, in moments of crisis, there are huge opportunities, and the resilience of the community on the ground, they're, as Xiomara said, not waiting for anyone to come save them, but really moving to try to define kind of a new agenda for the island. And in this case, I think that both huge opportunities, or several opportunities. So folks have risen up to really kind of fight the island's debt, to challenge the legality of the debt. As Mercedes mentioned, huge fights around privatization of schools and energy, really trying to kind of redefine what the public good is and demand that government actually solve the needs and address the needs. Fights against or in support of democracy, challenging the validity of the control board, raising deep questions about the island's historical, political relationship, fights about land and displacement, given the mass migration, given the way federal dollars have flowed to the island, and fundamentally a fight around democracy. And these fights around democracy have to be fought across multiple levels. I think, Xiomara and Dennis both mentioned, the need on the island. This fight is happening. It has been happening for a very, very long time. And what we're seeing on the island is kind of new formations, really new kind of networks and relationships that are kind of challenging the traditional power structures on the island and trying to create kind of lasting infrastructure to challenge both the island's development and its political kind of history. But then the mass migration of Puerto Ricans to the mainland also creates huge opportunities, right? It creates huge opportunities for organizing and advocacy for Puerto Ricans to engage, to help shape, who's elected, so that in the U.S., in a way that actually helps give voice to the challenges on the island. Huge migrations to Florida will affect the national electoral landscape. Florida is a critical swing state. And Puerto Ricans in the diaspora have also, along with, folks on the island, have really been on the front lines of trying to mobilize U.S. dollars and resources to support the movements on the island, to make sure that in this moment of crisis, we're not just in response mode, but we're also proactively thinking about how we construct a new economy, new politics that really foster equity and inclusion. And with that, I'll pause.
That was great, Jerry. Thank you so much, partly for just bringing us up to speed historically, but also contextualizing some of what is at stake for all of our communities as we think about deepening relationships with Puerto Rico and the organizing that's happening there. I just wanted to open up the floor a little bit for those of you who are on the call who are doing work in Puerto Rico, live in Puerto Rico right now. So I don't know, Maria, if you're still on the line, or Jorge, if you wanted to just share your reflections, if there's anything that you feel is really important for folks to know as they come to Puerto Rico and try to build relationship with community, anything that we missed that you think you'd want to lift up. Don't mean to put you on the spot, but we'd love to bring your voices into the room and the work that you're doing. And looking at you now, Maria, I don't know if you'd want to comment. Hola.
Hola. One of the things that I think it should be said is that this colonial status that we have had, it really affects our minds, even before Maria, and that this element of repression creates fear in people, fear for liberty, fear for freedom. So when people come to the island and visit us, sometimes it's hard for them to understand why in the midst of so much abuse, there are people having so much contemplation. And I think that it's important to know that, colonialism does play a number in your mind. And right now, in the midst of everything, I think that there are still people disoriented. I think that there are people in Puerto Rico that are more afraid than ever. Maybe not, the people that you're going to interact per se, but at least for our constituency. For so many, it's very hard to stand up. Sometimes it's hard because their lives take over. They are still in survival mode. So organizing is hard when you have people in survival mode. And so, that's another aspect. And of course, the other aspect that I don't want to fail not to mention is that, our colonial situation is actually linked to the idea that Puerto Rico has been racialized as a Black country, a racialized other, inferior other, that has been there from the beginning, and we internalize that. We internalize that we are an inferior other. It's part of our socialization. And I know that some people have been talking about the education system and so on. And it is an important part that we have to retrace, that we have to have that, the kind of education that will bring truth, not distorted, not myth and so on, you know, that we have been filled for so long. You know, things like Maria's Fund, you know, it's an anomaly in Puerto Rico because the level of repression that we have endured sometimes even doesn't allow us to mention the word colonialism. It has only been over the last years that we have been talking colonialism more in the open, but it is a process. And I think that now during this year, we're still going through post-traumatic stress, but I think that people are understanding at a deeper level, you know, what colonialism and racism is. I know that we find a bit less opposition to our work and to our decolonizing work, but still it's very difficult to talk about racism in Puerto Rico. People have like a psychosis, you know, the denial, the knee-jerk reaction of, you know, we are all, you know, Black, we are all a mixture, and therefore there's no problem. And the reality is that at the top of us están los más blanquitos, you know, they are those that are the lightest of us, managing our lives, making decisions for us, and that is a reality. And at the bottom of us is the darkest of us. That is a reality that sometimes is very hard for people. I mean, the Rosellos, you know, come from a long line of what you would call, you know, hacendados or plantation masters, you know. That's here in Puerto Rico, that's our legacy. And it's totally connected with what is going on today. You see those people in La Junta, and Xiomara mentioned this, there are, you know, about, you know, 6 people, you know, that are very, very light. You know, even those that created the crisis are represented there, that represented the banks are represented there. And then you have a woman of Ukrainian background, you know, making decisions for us. That is something that we withstand, and then you cannot talk about these things, because if you talk about them, you're being xenophobic, you know. But the reality is that this is a colonial racial problem, and it is right there in the open to see, but our own denial, sometimes we don't want to see that. And so one of the things that people coming to Puerto Rico actually could help a lot is by making it all right, you know, visibilizing this issue and making it all right to speak about this issue. Sometimes when people from the outside see the reality, it's easier for people in Puerto Rico to acknowledge that this is going on. So I just wanted to add that, not that anything needed to be added. I mean, it has been so complete and so thorough, you know, that, but I just wanted to put that little piece there.
That's really valuable, Maria, that, you know, the ways that international solidarity can actually support local movement led by Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico. I don't know, Jorge, if you're still on the line, if there might be something you might want to add, or with the work that Agitarta is doing in the red. So we might not have you. If you're still there, feel free to jump in, Jorge. I wanted to talk a little bit, y'all. We're gonna I'll take a couple of questions and comments of all of you who've presented. If you might have things you want to respond to each other about, we welcome that. One question around organizing, the fact that this junta exists, how does that affect or change the way that you all have been organizing to date and what's to come in the future? I'm wondering if there's anything that's different or on the horizon that you all would like folks to understand about the movement in Puerto Rico right now. in terms of responding and organizing against this junta who has this almost unilateral power around the distribution of your resources and decisions around public services, etc.
So I think one thing I'll comment on that I think is important when people understand what organizing means in Puerto Rico is that the moment that you have a body like the junta, which is 7, people who represent banks, the 1%, half of them don't even live in Puerto Rico, that are completely unaccountable, right, and are sort of the next level of colonialism. So talking about a win, right, when we organize, we usually talk about, how can we win? Like what can we advance short term? Both requires fighting back, which people have been doing in Puerto Rico. And a lot of groups are also betting on organizing to build self-sustainable communities that represent really an alternative to the state. And I think that that's an interesting conversation. I'll be curious to explore with people, because some people say, well, what happens when, it's both, right? What happens when we have to demand from the state justice, right? We have to demand things. And the reality is that when we organize, part of what we think about is, what can I offer? Like, what do people get by being engaged in the struggle, right? What do I feel like something changed in my real life? And in the context of a Puerto Rico under debt, and Puerto Rico just dramatically traumatized by Maria, a Puerto Rico with a Promesa Fiscal Control Board, it's fundamental to support organizing that is building an alternative source of support for groups. Because the truth is, there are going to be fights we're going to win, and there are other things that people are figuring out ways to support themselves without the state. And I think that a lot of groups, right, are finding organized not necessarily around policy all the time. So policy is a thing that we want to change, but really there's also a lot of organizing around, if this is our reality, how are we going to change this? Even if the state doesn't show up, or the state doesn't even have resources. There might be even towns in Puerto Rico that have a negative budget. So you can advocate all you want to the mayor of your town, but he's going to be like, I have $3,000 to operate this year. And, so I'll say that, because a lot of the spaces that are being organized in Puerto Rico, autogestión is a word that people will hear. And I invite people to be curious and ask people, what does that mean, right?
And then Dennis.
Can I jump in, actually?
Oh, yeah.
Can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
So I think that it's important to just recognize clearly that La Junta is the culmination of colonialism, right? It is now kind of the direct kind of rule or oversight of the island by a body that was not democratically elected and a body that was appointed by Congress. I think it's important to understand those power dynamics and be really clear, because I think Xiomara talked a little bit about the landscape on the island, but this is where I really do think that transnational solidarity is critical. This is a congressionally appointed body, and Congress does not respond to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has no elected representatives. There are now 5 million Puerto Ricans on the mainland, and many of our struggles are the same struggles, right, of all communities of color, right? Again, we talked about criminalization, privatization, assault against democracy. And so the opportunity here is for the diaspora in alliance, in coalition with communities of color, to articulate a justice agenda, actually, that puts pressure on Congress, right? So that Congress can be held accountable and can kind of create the space on the island for the kinds of efforts that Xiomara talked about. So here I do think that there is a moment for kind of the island and diaspora to reimagine our relationship with each other and to think about power, how we exercise power collectively and in coalition with a broader community of color.
Thank you, Jerry.
Great. So I wanted to open up the floor for any questions you all might have. Those of you doing your own organizing and policy work, with young people in your respective communities. Are there any questions that have come up from them? If you have young people on the line, what does the youth organizing movement look like in Puerto Rico? What are some of those connections that we might be thinking about? Or any other kind of questions that folks might have around doubts, ideas, suggestions for how to enter in a solidarity stance that promotes long-term relationships and movement building. Want to just open up the floor? Xiomara, if you could start maybe sharing that example of that person that went for a week and supported an effort. I thought that was really helpful for those of us here who are not really sure how do we come, what could we bring to the table. Do you remember what you told me about the ED and the budget and that? Yeah, that's one.
With Manuela, that some ways that, that there are many ways in which we can show solidarity. And I find it particularly interesting when people are able to find something very specific to support in, right? And that it might be your talent. So I was sharing with someone who came to Puerto Rico who was really good in budgeting, like just an ops person, and came and helped an ED for 4 days to put together, rethink her budget, now post relief, and be able to present it to her board. And it was something that was like very specific and targeted, and that ED shared with me, like, it was such a relief, right? Like, there are other moments where help feels more like work, like coordinating for other people to come, or like just, it can be capacity draining. And so I think like capacity adding ways of being an ally are interesting to explore. And I thought that was like, she was just like, so excited. She was like, this is something that I would have never been able to do. It really dramatically changed, allows me to look at my year differently. And it wasn't a very heavy lift for that organization. So it's a simple example, but.
That's awesome. And I'm going to put some folks on the spot. Our friend Mari Nieves Alba, who will be speaking at the conference. Mari, I wonder if you have any suggestions or ideas or examples that you've seen or heard around how community has been in solidarity with each other and ways to be an ally. And others, please feel free to chat in your ideas.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Hello, everyone. Actually, I was just going to email all of us and say, like, I think really practically something that would be useful now, like people were talking about the Red de Apoyo Mutuo, which has been a very important link between the diaspora and the islands, and a way that those of us that are not living in Puerto Rico can, have been able to contribute very concretely beyond our individual relationships with organizations or people. But something that I was going to suggest or inquire about is whether or not we have access to a roster or an email list even where we can sort of learn about who from Puerto Rico will be with us at the conference so that we can actively sort of engage around how we can support them concretely. I personally right now am interested in linking with organizations that are interested in restorative justice to offer like support or training in that area. And I have Xiomara actually just sort of inspired me because I have like a whole host of skills that would be useless if you didn't put them to use. So just thinking about, what skills and capacities we can bring to the table to support, but, certainly also engage in dialogue around, where our energies are best placed here in the United States to support at this particular juncture. I think for those of us that have family on the island, our initial and for the last year, honestly, a lot of the individual work folks have been doing is sort of, survival, right? We're trying to help people survive. Some people are just getting power. Some people are still without power, and water, etc. So just moving toward a more strategic envisioning process where we can look at sort of maybe some of the macro issues and places where we can plug in will be really helpful.
Thank you, Mari. Just want to offer an answer to that question. After October 1st, the conference app, we're using a platform called WOVA. So the WOVA app will be up and live, and you all will be able to connect with each other. We're finalizing the touches on building that app out, and we'll try to find a way to make sure that those groups that are in Puerto Rico are either asterisks or highlighted in a particular way so that you all can begin to figure out or maybe it'll be maybe like a chat between participants for like those looking to bring resources and solidarity to groups on the ground. Just wanted to underscore something that Xiomara mentioned earlier, that to even field questions and solidarity actually takes capacity that a lot of the groups may be struggling with. So I don't know what you think about this, Xiomara, but we will have the app. All of you all will be signed on and registered. One of our chats, chat rooms or like threads on the app could be, or channels can be like solidarity connections, groups on the island and diaspora. And so anybody who has a resource they want to offer up will be able to join that channel and put it out there and start connecting with people when they get to the island or before. That's definitely one thing that is an easy lift for us that we can easily incorporate into our app. Any other ideas? Oh, actually, we have some really great comments and questions. Yeah, let me see what it says here from Ruben. Ruben has a good question for everyone. Is there a voting process or decision on who represents Puerto Rico? Or is it better to find ways to support being self-sufficient? How can we put pressure on Congress in the mainland? Do we need to start some sort of Kaepernick movement? Let me know. Pressure on Congress in the mainland. I know that Center for Popular Democracy and some really powerful allies have been doing some of this work. I don't know, Xiomara, if you could talk a little bit, or Jerry, about some of that work that you've seen, or if anyone here on the call has been involved in that, feel free to chime in. So moving Congress in the mainland, any thoughts? Given what Jerry said, that most more Boricuas are here in the mainland than in Puerto Rico at this point. Anybody?
I know that Yomara Velez in Atlanta, they're sort of immediately after Hurricane Maria, a bunch of us in different states throughout the U.S., initially Louisiana, Georgia, and New York City, were sort of creating little pods, if you will, to solicit like elected official support initially for immediate hurricane relief, particularly when a lot of the relief work like that, which Dennis and others were doing, was sort of caught and trapped in the ports. Yomara Velez in Atlanta, Georgia, I know has developed some sort of dialogue with her electeds there in Georgia. The other efforts, I don't really know like where they are presently, but you know, advocacy at the sort of federal level was definitely something that has been on the table for a lot of folks, but I don't know like where a central source of information for that is.
Yeah, since Jerry, I can say a little bit to that quickly. There isn't right now a process other than having a voice in Congress. There's been conversations about what would it look like. Globally, there is experiences of decolonization in a more broad perspective in terms of what would it look like for Puerto Rico to move out of sort of the current political status into either independence or statehood. And so there are, I think it's more relevant than ever to talk about like, what does decolonizing literally look like? And I think that that's like an interesting conversation. And I do think that there is an important effort being done by organizations like people at Center for Popular Democracy, who organized, for example, 1 year after Maria campaign, and organize actions all around the US. And there's a lot of work being done to engage Puerto Ricans around the United States. And I think the key will be around what are the demands. I think where we're at is like, we need to definitely put pressure on Congress in the mainland. I think it's been done, many of our fights. So for example, Vieques is an island that's part of Puerto Rico and used to have the Navy used to operate there and do live bombing. And because of a long decades and decades of a community struggle that eventually grew until a tipping point of like massiveness. And when it became massive, it definitely, there was a lot of people holding different roles, including pressure in Congress. So I think what will be key in the next year as we build like solidarity for Puerto Rico is really getting more and more clear on what are the demands, like what are we asking Congress to do, repeal promesa, right, and allow the people of Puerto Rico to restructure their debt and cancel debt that doesn't have to be paid. So there are things, I'll say that as an example, that I think we're at a moment where we're getting more and more clear, and I think with that, definitely solidarity from the US will be important.
Thank you, Xiomara. So as we're getting to the end of our call, I just wanted to lift up. Thank you, Ikim, for your offer of how to be in solidarity coming from Brooklyn, New York. I want to encourage all of us to really, when you get after October 1st, jump on the WOVA app and really visit that channel that's going to be specifically dedicated to supporting the meetups. And to Xiomara's point, the personal relationship building that must happen so that we can start to really stay connected and together. And, you know, this is a mere 3 days in our life as the beginning for some of us. There's a long road ahead. We are really excited and understand this conference is not going to do all of it. It's just the beginning, barely scratching the surface to help inspire us to go and educate ourselves further, to build deeper relationships, to strategize and align movements and funding and resources and strategy on our own beyond the funder as the vehicle, right? We know that that is not the movement. We are here to support the movement, but y'all are the movement. And so we want to really lift that up and celebrate all the work that you all do. So yeah, visit the app, join, get ready, pack your bags. I'm not going to tell you what to bring, but I will say leave some extra room to bring beautiful things back from Puerto Rico. I joke with my family. I always put like I go to the Kio con Loisa and I put like an alcapurria in my pocket and then I eat it on the plane. Because I'm like, oh, this is the very last warm alcapurria from Puerto Rico. So I just want to really celebrate all of you. Thank everybody for being on the call. The app is called the WOVA app. You will get an email, Mason, inviting you to select your community tour and sign on to the app and start building those really important connections. So I want to just thank Dennis from El Grito de Sunset Park, Jerry Maldonado from Ford Foundation, Mercedes Martinez from the Teachers Federation, and Xiomara Caro Diaz from the Center for Popular Democracy and the Maria Fund. Solidarity and love to all of you. Thank you for your service to all of us. And thank you all for joining. This call was recorded. We will share a recording with all of you so you can share with your fellow comrades and members and community people. Thank you, Dennis, for sharing your contact. Jen is going to put up a PowerPoint slide with all of our presenters' contact info. They will let you know whether they want you to reach out to them. Remember that some of them are one-people teams, like Xiomara's team right now is a one-person team doing a lot of heavy lifting, so please be mindful of that. But here they are, there's their email. And thank you all for joining. We sign off from Andrus Family Fund headquarters in solidarity. Thank you all.